Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very sad to be here this evening because I'm sorry that we have to have this debate once again. I mean, it's certainly no secret that the last few years have been very hard in Alberta, not just for Calgarians, but for all Albertans, and in fact, I would go on to say the nation. The nation, because of course the energy sector, the oil and gas sector, is one that has a rich history of supplying jobs, not only in Calgary, where I was born and raised, not only in Alberta, but wide across this country. And Mr. Speaker, it's really a, to use the term of Lemony Snicket, a series of unfortunate events which brought us here today. And it's a number of events that, I must admit, include those of our provincial government, the province, without question. But the truth of the matter is, really, I think when we ask the question, who created this price differential crisis? Well, Mr. Speaker, it was in fact this government. This government certainly had a lot to do with it. Mr. Speaker, I'll mention some statistics which have been mentioned already this evening, and I should add, Mr. Speaker, I'll be splitting my time with the member with Aurora Oak Ridge's Richmond Hill. Thank you very much. I should have mentioned that from the outset. But as you know, the oil and gas sector has lost over $100 billion in investment and over 100,000 jobs. That this is 8 times the GDP and more jobs than the entire aerospace sector. That this is 5 times the GDP and almost as many jobs as the entire auto sector. So as I said, it is not only just an Alberta crisis, it is a national crisis. And that, in fact, the Canadian Energy Research Institute says that every job in Canadian upstream oil and gas creates 2 indirect and 3 induced jobs in other sectors across the country in other provinces. And in fact, every 1 job in the oil sands creates 7 manufacturing jobs. Another very disturbing fact, Mr. Speaker, is that in a recent World Competitiveness Forum report, which ranks countries based on a global competitiveness index, also reflects Canada's competitive disadvantage relative to the U.S. Canada ranks 12th out of 140 countries, while the U.S. ranks first, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I have a direct story related to this. I'm very fortunate, as you know, I come from the diplomatic corps. Previous to my job as a parliamentarian, and as such, I was very fortunate in Calgary to be invited to an event called U.S. Select, in which the American ambassador to Canada attended. And when I went to this event, frankly, it was just terrifying, Mr. Speaker, because it was in fact the American government, with much success, luring away investment and jobs to the United States of America. And that's certainly not very hard to do at this time, unfortunately, because certainly while the Conservative government has an incredible track record of 4 pipelines, 2 of those increasing coastal access, the Trans-Canada Keystone Pipeline, Enbridge's Alberta Clipper, Kinder Morgan Anchor Loop, increasing capacity to the West Coast, as well as Enbridge's Line 9B reversal. Everyone knows here, the Liberals have killed 2 major pipelines, Enbridge's Northern Gateway Pipeline, as well as Trans-Canada's Energy East. And who, of course, can forget, Mr. Speaker, just the absolute horror of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which for us on this side of the House here was like the plot to a bad horror film. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. Every day we'd sit here, the deadline's looming, we've got to come up with something. The deadline's looming, we've got to come up with something. And then, lo and behold, Canadians bought a pipeline. It was, in this case, the butler didn't do it. It was an ending we could have not possibly foreseen. But as I said, like a plot to a bad horror movie. But worse than that, Mr. Speaker, we have C-69, a bill with without question, in the minds of many Albertans, and certainly in my mind, kills the potential future of any energy projects going forward. And that in addition, to sort of add some salt into the wound, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the very individual who said that, he laments the existence of the tar sands, I believe is the term that he uses, has the actual nerve to show up in Calgary this week and try and play friendly and try and show that he is on the side of Albertans and of Calgarians. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid Calgarians know better. Exactly. They did not buy it for a minute because actions, Mr. Speaker, speak louder than words. And the actions of this government have shown over and over again that who created this pipeline differential crisis by not doing the things to ensure that our product could get to market? This government, Mr. Speaker, and Albertans will not stand for it. Calgarians will not stand for it. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to mention some quotes from stakeholders. Now, this first one is very dear to me. Nancy Southern, CEO of ATCO. I'm very proud to be on the Trilateral Commission with Nancy Southern, but I was actually at the AGM where she said this, and the ATCO AGM, I mean, this is something that is run like clockwork. And, this is certainly these incredible corporations in Calgary, they have rich histories and they have solid ways of doing things, and they are very gracious. They will go with the flow, so to speak, until they absolutely possibly no longer can. And it was just at this AGM where, as I said, I was so fortunate to be present, where Nancy Southern spoke these words: "How heartbreaking it is to see our wonderful resource-laden province so constrained by regulatory policy and politics of various dispositions." Now, Mr. Speaker, you could have heard a pin drop in that room, because everyone knew that Ms. Southern was speaking the truth, and thank goodness she was speaking the truth. She was not alone in the truth that she was speaking. But, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that who created this price differential crisis? This government. It doesn't have to be this way, Mr. Speaker, and that is my message to Calgarians and to Albertans. It doesn't have to be this way. There is another way. There is another way. Because what will a Conservative government do in 2019 when we come to power? Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, we will repeal the Liberal carbon tax. We will repeal Bill C-69, the anti-pipeline bill. We will end the ban on shipping traffic on the north coast of British Columbia. We will enact legislation that will clarify the roles of proponents and governments that are involved in consultations. We will ensure that standing is given only to those with expertise or who are directly impacted by the project in order to end foreign-funded interference in regulatory hearings. We will provide certainty to investors on approval timelines and schedules. We will use the federal declaratory power to declare a major project for the general advantage of Canada under Section 92.10 of the Constitution Act 1867, where we deem it necessary for future projects. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be this way. And here's the best news of all, Mr. Speaker, is that young people are getting the message. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had the absolute pleasure, along with our deputy leader, the member of Parliament for Milton, as well as our natural resources shadow minister, the member of Parliament for Lakeland, to meet with an incredible organization, a group of young people called the Young Pipeliners of Canada. Molly, Sarah, John, Tran, I hope you're listening to this, because we were listening to you yesterday. And we want you to know that we hear you. We understand that you value this industry, that you understand and value the history of this industry, that you value your jobs, and that you value this sector as the future of not just for Calgary, not just for Canada, but for all of Canada. I hope the government will join these young people and join our party, the official opposition, the Conservative Party of Canada, in supporting this industry, in destroying Bill C-69, and in taking responsibility for this price differential crisis because they created it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.